All right, we're going to give everybody one more minute to join. Just a few more seconds to join us, and then we'll get started. Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. We're going to have a webinar, Benchmarking Your Healthcare Security Success with CyberGuard Advantage and TrustMap, increasing your security program performance. Just so everyone knows, this will be recorded, so you can go back and retrieve it if you've missed anything. And if you have any questions, we'll get to them at the end or get back to you if we run out of time. All right, benchmarking is one of the data points of performance that allows us to keep checks and balances against the amount of money we're spending, the level of maturity we wish to achieve, and the justification for the advancement of our security program. A benchmark, what's also great about it is it can also provide a level of security. And as the saying goes, I don't have to be faster than the bear, I just have to be faster than you. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about the webinar is especially relevant because of the new HIPAA updates and what's happened just recently around that, the greatest area of needs, what we're seeing, the breach data that's available, some of the frameworks, and then from there, we'll dive headfirst into benchmarking for the success, for your success of your security program and how to compare against your industry peers. My name is Stephen Marshowitz. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing here at CyberGuard Advantage. It's my pleasure to introduce Sajeev Prelis and Chad Beckman. Sajeev, start us off and give us a little overview about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Stephen. So Sajeev Prelis, EVP, one of the EVPs at CyberGuard Advantage. Been in the IT audit and IT consulting space for over 20 years. Being part of teams that do SOC assessments, PCI assessments, ISO, high trust, yeah, you name the compliance effort. I've been part of that, NIST attestations, and been helping companies and helping teams, try to be more secure in their data security journey. Chad, you want to go next?
Yes, thank you, Sajeev. Chad Beckman. I've been in this industry, information security, for over 25 years. Have helped companies ranging from multiple industries, healthcare, life sciences being one, retail, manufacturing, finance, and others. And a big part of my experience has been helping organizations to improve upon the understanding of what needs to be accomplished from a cybersecurity and cyber risk perspective, but also what does that mean in terms of making certain investments, prioritization, and also impacting and aligning with other objectives and initiatives across the business. And so very happy to be here today and partnering with Sajeev and team.
Okay, Sajeev, start us off with the changes proposed for HIPAA.
Sure. So, we are talking about healthcare here, data security as a whole, but healthcare specifically. So can't ignore the news that came just a little while ago. So the NPRM, information that we got. Basically, what it is they're enhancing or implementing kind of a stricter cybersecurity rules and measures for covered entities and business associates. So there were some that were part of the rules that that had more of nice to do, should do. Now those have become kind of must do's and requirement that are required to do. And a couple of we kind of highlighted the main ones here. Regulated entities conduct a compliance audit at least every 12 months. Hopefully, a lot of organizations are doing this, but this is putting a little bit more requirements and formality into the rule set. So if all of these get finalized and approved, just everybody, business associates, covered entities need to be ready for a little bit more rigor on the cybersecurity side. Independent assessments every 12 months or so tends to be where most compliance efforts are going, including this one. So identifying what your assets, making sure you have partners ready to go to do the assessments, kind of the continuous monitoring, updates, kind of your cybersecurity posture, just kind of getting a little stronger is what this is all about. And then also kind of the granularity and how you conduct things, the risk assessments, the risk analysis, a little bit more detail is what they seem to be looking for. So this is nothing new for everybody in the field. This is just where things are going. Things are getting just a little bit more detailed, a little bit more granular. Customers are wanting a little bit more. So with all the data leakages and stuff out there, HIPAA is kind of following suit. So just that we couldn't go without mentioning that.
Yeah, so take us through a little bit about benchmarking, just in general. Why are people doing it? Why is it so important? And what are you seeing sort of in the industry in and around it? Start with you, Sajeev, and then touch on with Chad.
Yeah, so benchmarking, I mean, it has been there for a while. It's there's two avenues that we see clients doing. Generally, it's benchmarking, to a compliance framework. Hey, this is what we do. We'll touch on that next, but our foundation is based on NIST CSF, for instance. That's the kind of the goldish standard. Or some organizations go, NIST 853, ASR 171. Just something to need something bigger. So that's benchmarking to a framework. And that's kind of been the most of what a lot of companies do is, yeah, hey, we have all of these compliance efforts. We do SOC, we do ISO, we do HITRUST. Our foundation is based on NIST is kind of what what a lot of companies do. And then the next step is to benchmark against industry peers. So if you're a SaaS solution providing services to healthcare, your industry peer group, you're still in the same industry, healthcare, but the group may be a little different. So what are the other organizations doing? So that is kind of the next step, and that's what we are going to be talking about, because we looking at your posture, making sure your security posture is right. Am I doing the right level of what I need to be doing for my industry, for where we are today? Those are all questions that are harder to answer and harder to report to the board. So industry benchmarking tends to help with that, as we'll talk through. And I'll let Chad jump in here as well before we go through each one of these things a little bit in detail.
Yeah, thank you, Sajeev. So everything that Sajeev said is spot on. I would also add too that if you are fairly new in leading a security program, one of the key tasks that is really important is to benchmark your security program in those first 90 to 120 days. And the reason for that is so you really are taking a temperature, if you will, and to make sure, that even data that may have been shared with you from your predecessor or historically from other assessments, that you have a fresh perspective and you can also validate the information that you have from the past. In addition to that, a big part of establishing a benchmark against a framework or other regulatory requirements that the business is truly held to is to then be able to tailor the security program roadmap, prioritize initiatives, and be able to effectively communicate what plans you have to accomplish in the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and obviously how that fits into the 3 to 5 year objectives. And so having benchmarking is really two views, right? It's one, benchmarking is we need to benchmark ourselves against a set of controls. And another view of benchmarking is how are we doing compared to our industry peers? So those are sort of two benchmark numbers that an organization should have available to them for taking the temperature of the security program in the business. Yeah, so by the numbers, if we look at benchmarking, we went ahead and ran a report in TrustMap looking at our healthcare life science industry. And what we found, looking at HIPAA specifically, where there are three control areas that were outperforming others over the previous 12 months, essentially calendar year 2024. And what we found is that everyone is doing unique user identification really well, which kind of relates to the second one, person or entity authentication, right? So identification and then secondarily authentication. And then the third is encryption and decryption, having those processes and the right technologies in place to protect that sensitive data, including authentication credentials for that matter. And then if we look at overall, from a maturity perspective, how is healthcare life sciences producing as an industry, irregardless of what control framework they're using? That score came up to be a 3.04 for calendar year 2024. Can use that information as necessary, and if anyone has interest in looking at other industry benchmarks, please reach out to the team at TrustMap. All right, so as we just saw the opportunities, or rather the top 3 best performing controls, specifically around HIPAA, we also took a look at what are the 3 worst performing control or practice areas with regards to HIPAA, kind of a healthcare focus here. And those were all closely related as well. I would say most of these really, if you're familiar with the NIST CSF categories, would fall into the recoverability aspects here. So that being testing and revision procedures. The second being applications and data criticality analysis. That helps to really prioritize what's most important and least important in our applications or in our operations. And then also emergency mode operation plan, which is essentially being able to have a disaster recovery capability, business continuity, that also supports the continuation of operations due to an unforeseen circumstance causing availability issues of various categories. Could be a malware incident. It could be a more physical weather-related event that impacts availability of systems and data and so on. So being able to have those processes in place, sometimes these continuity and these procedures from a continuity perspective, availability perspective, specifically don't necessarily fall in security, but security certainly has a role in it, part of the HIPAA control testing, and being able to really support those capabilities, those strategies with other business teams, likely through IT and so forth, is critically important.
Yeah, Chad, just one thing on that one. That's interesting data, because when you're looking at things like ransomware and things, you need a really robust DRBCP plan to kind of mitigate, a ransomware attack and, get systems up and running. So looking at the 3 here, the least performing, when DRBCP is there, that's not a good, omen or look for like the ransomware attacks that we see, happen all the time, right? So those are interesting data points.
Any
Yeah,
thoughts on the commonalities between these? It's curious of why, you would think a hospital would have, probably most especially, a disaster recovery plan. That would be one of their most important things. Curious that
absolutely.
it's there.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. So, there could be really a couple of reasons why these came up as the least performing. One being what I mentioned just a moment ago, where the information security, cybersecurity team doesn't necessarily have continuity of operations under their purview. In some organizations, they do. A lot of healthcare organizations, they likely don't. They have another role that is separate of security and/or IT oftentimes that is dedicated to the recovery operations. And so from that standpoint, we may not be getting the data from each customer in the healthcare that's measuring against HIPAA specifically. As a result, these controls are performing low. I think in addition to that, security is certainly a big part of assisting with especially recovery testing and also preventative controls to help prevent at least a digital availability risk. And they're perhaps not as knowledgeable of some of the current workflows, current processes that might be in place to prevent that. Based on what I mentioned earlier, that there are other leadership directors and certainly some in IT and certainly some outside of IT that look at both the physical continuity of the operations as well as the data continuity system availability. Now, if we kind of peel this back a layer and consider going back, I don't know if people still subscribe to this CIA triad, right? Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Availability is certainly a cornerstone of the security and cyber risk management program. So it's important for people to understand what their capabilities really are in this area and participate in those exercises when they do occur.
All right, we won't spend too much time on this. There's some interesting data points here that we want to do, but this is from the 2024 Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. Eagerly wait for it to come out every year because it has some very, very interesting data and presented really well. So this is kind of the gold standard out there for any any breach report. But on the healthcare side, some interesting points. We all know that healthcare attacks are financially motivated. It is to the actors are looking for personal information, not your medical data. This is to get your PII, not necessarily that someone had X procedure performed, although that does happen for medical fraud and things like that. But it's really to steal personal information. And the interesting one was the miscellaneous errors. What they term as miscellaneous errors is the highest form of breach that happened in 2024. And that gets into the human error component. So sending the wrong mail, the physical mail that goes out, emails that go out. So it's the leaking of information accidentally, or in some cases purposely, leaking data out. So that was a interesting interesting data point, and that this is also not very surprising. But 70% of the threat actors behind data breaches were internal. So external was was only a few. The common thread here really is there is a lot of personal data in in healthcare. In not just we're not talking about hospitals or business associates. We are talking about SaaS providers that support healthcare. There is data all over the place. So leaking of that data is very prevalent, as you've seen in the news, and it's not getting any so, and that's why we're talking about benchmarking and security posture in this presentation. some of the frameworks. So depending on, when we talk about benchmarking, there's benchmarking to industry, there's benchmarking to, framework. Because if somebody were to come and say, or if a breach were to happen, hopefully not, but if a breach were to happen and, the investigation happens, they'll say, okay, here's our compliance. We are high trust compliant. Here it is. But that's, not enough these days. Compliance is a minimum standard. It's not, secure. Just because you're compliant does not mean you're secure. I think everybody's heard that many times. So what we also look for is something more. So what framework is your security controls based on? So at the very top, you have your CIS, your NIST, some sort of very robust framework that you can base on. There's other good frameworks out there as well, like PCI DSS, for instance. It doesn't deal with health information, but it's a really good foundation for data security. So that we see sometimes even organizations that need to be PCI compliant, they use that. ISO 27001, SOC 2, they all have pretty decent foundation for policies, procedures, but the controls framework and things really need to be enhanced more towards the NIST and the CIS side and the PCI DSS side to be useful for a fully integrated data security framework. We see a lot of hybrid. A lot of companies though, hey, we are based on NIST CSF plus PCI DSS or some sort of hybrid model that suits them. But basic point is when you have your data security environment, you need to be able to articulate very clearly what that's based on. And we do see a lot of clients still, when we ask this question, that they're not able to say what the security controls framework is based on.
So Chad, what are you seeing in the frameworks, in the performance or the benchmarking on these frameworks, NIST in particular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's undoubtedly NIST CSF for the last 2 to 3 years being the most prominent. That's what we're seeing. But if you also look at other reports, I believe that even worldwide is the most adopted framework. And what we see in customers, oftentimes they have, HIPAA and they're doing high trust, PCI DSS because they do take payments. But their policies and what they manage their enterprise controls to oftentimes is NIST CSF. And we've seen a lot of adoption of, going from NIST CSF 1.1 to now 2.0 over the last 12 months or so. And, this screen here is an example of how to represent at an aggregated level. How are we doing with, governance, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, all of these key categories, govern being, obviously the new category in NIST CSF 2.0. And in this case, the goal is far off to the right. And being able to just, communicate effectively where the security program controls are, and then having additional follow-up to show, if we're having to manage report against PCI, did we have any gaps or any findings from our attestation? Similar to HIPAA and or high trust, did we have any gaps or do we have any areas to focus on? So being able to look, as Sajeev kind of put it out in that framework slide, being able to look at all the requirements the organization is managing to and reporting against, and articulating that in a clear, transparent, visual way to those that are really at an arm's length of the security performance, essentially. So. Yeah, and this is another example of, the screenshot on the left of the screen being able to look at on multiple data points in a single view. Where is our maturity score today? That's the first dial you see in the upper left. Where's our industry benchmark? That's the second dial to the right. And then how are we performing across the various maturity levels, given all the controls we're managing? That is the top row right bar graph. And then we have business objectives. You can't really see that in the slide in the center. And then everybody's probably recognizes the risk heat map, looking at the quantity in each of those squares and how many risks we have that are, critical, high, medium, low, very low. And then the bottom lower right is the projects that are assigned to mitigate risks and or improve controls, and being able to look at the status of each of those, pending, open, and closed. And then the over to the right is a really interesting view. Again, small screenshot there, but one that gives you the ability to compare where we were 2 years ago, where we are this year, where we are planning to be next year. That's one use case. Another use case here is to look at how we've improved over the last 12, 18 months, whatever time frame is appropriate, and comparing also different groups or divisions that might be measured in an organization, right? And so there's a number of use cases here for comparative analysis, and this just gives you a sample, a visual of what that might look like. So yeah, go ahead, Sujeev.
Oh, sorry, Chad, I was going to say, we talked about, we put this slide up earlier just to kind of introduce. Now we want to talk a little bit, about each one. I mean, I think the benchmarking relates to, framework or framework plus industry. I think the articulation of that to kind of the board level, is always hard to do. So we try to put some points in here to show what what this would mean. The first one especially, so the balancing your security posture to meet the risk of your industry. So what that really means is, are you doing enough? Are you doing too much? Are you in the industry, as some of the graphs that Chad showed, are you lagging the industry average, or are you ahead of the industry average? So that's important when it comes to a breach, for instance. And if the industry is at a 3.04, and internally your organization is at like a 2.0, that's not a justifiable position to be in, right? To to show that you did everything you possibly could as an organization to to show up data security. And that justifiable level really is one of the keys that a lot of people don't think about. It's not, hey, all I need to do is high trust, all I need to do is SOC, all I need to do is ISO. We do that, we're good. That's just a compliance threshold, but the security threshold has not been met if security is judged at the compliance level. Chad, I don't know if you have anything to add to.
Yeah, that's very good what you just said, that last statement there, because I always subscribe to the belief that compliance does not equal security. Hopefully all of you listening to this kind of subscribe to that thought process. And it's important to obviously report against contractual requirements, regulatory requirements, whatever they may be. But it's even more important to get a lot of the fundamentals right. Fundamentals are, as we mentioned, NIST-CSF being one of the most popular globally anyway, as in terms of frameworks. ISO as well is another example of that. And being able to really understand how we are performing against those controls. We may be doing really well last quarter, but a change occurred in our environment, and what we discovered is that control that was outperforming is now underperforming where our target goal is. And so being able to really stay on top of that information and compare that to findings from your audit and other activities is really key to continually managing the security program performance. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and knowing where you are, and knowing where you were, where you are in relative to others, and knowing where you are today relative to where you were yesterday. That's another thing with benchmarking, because even internally, when you're looking at the team, we have teams that do cybersecurity maturity assessments year over year. You can do that every 6 months, and that is another way to show your progression through this. So if you had a score of 3.0 last time, and you're at a 3.5 this year, that just shows the maturity and the robustness of what you put in place to help your data security journey. So that's another thing to keep in mind. and then also competitive advantage because others may be doing things at 3.0, and do you want to go out there and say, hey, we subscribe to cutting edge data security, here's the thing, and we are at like a 4.0. So there's some competitive advantages to gain in benchmarking as well.
Yeah. I know we're at the bottom of the
Yep.
half hour here. Do we have any questions we want to quickly answer?
We have a couple, so let me get through just the last few, and then last few slides, just give you an overview of CyberGuard. I'll let you go over a trust map. But again, CyberGuard Advantage, we're able to do SOC audits, of course, high trust, a lot of things that we talked about today, PCI, risk assessments, penetration testing with a plethora of certifications, as well as our acquisition of Control Gap out of Canada. So it makes us one of the largest PCI compliance vendor in North America. And TrustMap.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So yeah, with TrustMap, we believe in a continuous process, removing a lot of the manual kind of start-stop and disconnected data approaches. So the cycle graphic you see on your left-hand of the slide is about measuring, and then number 2, reporting, number 3, putting a plan together and having the data to support those decisions, right, and making a plan, and then number 4, tracking improvements and assigning accountability across both internal and external teams. And focusing on some of the key challenges, which is consistent messaging, a business narrative, being able to look at trending that we talked about here today briefly, and then also determining how we're managing to certain risk appetites and obviously prioritizing the investments and projects with limited resources available. So that's where our passion lies.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I know we're up against the time. And I'll go through a few questions here. So if anybody wants to stick around for a few minutes, and then we'll wrap up. But thank you so much for joining today. One of the questions that came up was around how it's being used to the board. So if you're showing a benchmark of, for example, you're right around average, or you're below average, or you're well above average, how are you seeing organizations address that with their board, depending on where they stand in their maturity, or in their in how they rank against their industry peers?
Yeah, obviously depends on where the company is to the benchmark, but benchmarking to industry peers, like to the industry score, is really it's just part of the story, part of the narrative that people bring to a board discussion or executive level discussion, cybersecurity committee, whatever it might be, because a lot of people expect that and ask for it, right? It gives them another data point. But I also want to caution and say it's not the end all be all. Like I was mentioning earlier in our conversation, it's more important to provide context then. So if industry peers are at a 3.25 and your program's at a 3.05, but that score is going to go down based on upcoming changes, it's important to add that context so that the next board meeting that occurs and cybersecurity has a conversation with that same group of people, they're not expecting the goal to be met. So always setting the right expectations and adding the right context is important when using benchmarks.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. The other thing that I would add is, it's a quantitative way of providing information, whether it's going down and going up and the reasons why, but there's a number and there's something that you're shooting for. Because early without benchmarking, all you have is, hey, we don't have enough resources in security, we need more money, we need more people, we need this, right? So there isn't a goal that you're shooting for, and when you're at a board, it's just hard to justify giving money to something that doesn't have a kind of a progression of show a number, right? We are going from, our plan is to go from 3.0 to 3.325 in the next year, and here's what we need, and here's why. So it helps seal some of that communication.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for everyone sticking around, and thank you, Sajeev and Chad. Really appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Talk to you later. Take care.